Welcome to another episode of Thoughts and Bolts. I'm your host, Pedro Varia, and the name of today's episode is Why No Talk of Implants? I'm referring to the Age of Disclosure documentary, which is an excellent documentary, and I think everyone should watch it. Well, why no talk of implants? Well, if you listen to my past episode, one key reason is that this documentary has two audiences. Okay. There is the many and the few. With regards to the many, this documentary is for what you might call normies, right? People who are into their work, they're into sports, they're into their friends and reality shows, um, but they're not into the UFO subject for whatever reason, right? Even despite the fact that we had all these congressional hearings and New York Times articles and 60 Minutes, all that stuff going on, they didn't pay attention for whatever reason, right? And so this documentary is great for that because it gets on camera the kind of people normies really respect, right? Politicians, right? So you have Marco Rubio, you have Senator Round, Senator Gillibrand, Rep Andre Carson, Rep Luna, Burchett, and of course, all these great fighter pilots and sailors and scientists, right? The people who are part of OSAP coming forward and explaining, that look, you not only are UFOs real, but sometimes they crash and your government has some of them. That the Roswell mythology isn't just mythology, that it's essentially true. Okay. And so that's the first audience is the many. Okay. But this documentary also has another audience. It's the few. And by the few, I mean the legacy program, who in this little graph I call MJ12. It might be MJ27 for all we know. Um, but basically, this documentary is also geared to them, right? Because the legacy program is perfectly fine with slow drip disclosure that will mitigate the damage of ontological shock should the secret get out in its fullness, right? They like the slow drip disclosure. They've been pushing it since 2016. Um, but the people I'm calling the whistleblowers in the documentary, whether it be the admirals, the pilots, the OSAP alumni like Eric Davis, Hal Puthoff, Lou Elizondo, etc., Jay Stratton, right? The whistleblowers, their whole message is like, no, this slow drip disclosure is too slow. We need to get this stuff out because this secrecy may end up hurting us in the long run. Okay, so that's the second audience for this documentary. It is the legacy program insiders themselves. That's the second audience. That's the esoteric audience for this documentary. So it's very, very good. Um, However, if you're like me and you're super into this subject, um, there's nothing here you haven't heard before, right? So that's why I ask why no implants? Because I just explained one reason. Remember, if this is for the normies, okay, what Lula Elizondo talks about in his book, vis-a-vis having handled implants, um, it's maybe too much for that audience, right? So with regards to the many, this might be too much for them. With regards to the few, they already know. So there's no point in talking about implants. But Lil Elizondo talks about it in his book, his memoir. He talks about handling an implant um, that was no longer or wider than a joint of one of our fingers. And it looked more like a microchip encapsulated by a slimy, semi translucent casing of tissue. So keep that in mind. Put a pin in that because we're going to come back to it. But basically, he held something that was taken out of somebody's body, right? And it looked like a microchip encapsulated in a slimy, semi-translucent casing of tissue. Okay. And this isn't the only one, right? It's been taken out of living foreign military pilots, right? So the government has this stuff according to Lou Elizondo. But the question is this interest ongoing? Are they still interested in studying these so called alien implants? And the answer is Yes. And for that, we'll have to go to Gary Nolan, the great Dr. Gary Nolan from Stanford University, professor of pathology, and see what he has to say.
In a certain sense, but the reports often claim that black unmarked helicopters were seen around the time of the animal mutilations, things like this. And so I'm just wondering how you view these two sorts of events, or you
They're
don't.
just data. I really, I think for the same reasons that you feel it's almost off topic, or it's like it's so extraordinary to imagine that something like that might be going on. I mean, I can certainly create a world where it happens mentally, but as a scientist, I don't feel it's my responsibility nor prudent to go there until I address some of the more addressable
Right.
issues, like medical harm. I can take the same MRI of the same person and show that the same thing that thing happened to them, and I can compare it to 100 other people where they claim the same thing. I can take materials and I can take a piece of that material, lop it off, give it to another scientist, and they can find out the same thing that I did. You take the Atacama mummy, somebody take another piece of that skin, do the same study, and prove me right or wrong. Which is, we're now 11 or 12 years after that, and the people who claimed that I was a fraud, they have yet to disprove me. So I dare them. I dare them. And he who shall not be named know who I'm talking about. So because I know I'm right. So it's like we have to address the things that are scientifically addressable. I can't address right now telepathy. Other people might be able to. I can't address claimed abductions, or I had a government agency come to me, in the last year asking for my help with claimed implants. So I want nothing to do with them.
And
Claimed implants. I want nothing to do with them. Okay, those are his words. So there is a continuing interest on the part of the government with regards to implants taken out of people's bodies, people who claim to have been abducted. Okay, and that's straight out of the words of Dr. Gary Lerland, who also appeared in Age of Disclosure. Now, DIRDs, my favorite subject, the DIRDs, right? If you watched the last episode, I laid out a case for seeing them as examples of esoteric writing, because that's what they are. They're all about UFOs, but they never use the term UFO or UAP. Okay. Because again, there's two audiences, the many and the few. And in this case, the many is anyone in DoD who's interested in biomaterials or biosensors, right? For use in combat or whatever. But the few are the people in on the secret who know about the UFO crash retrieval program, who know about the others and the abductions and the implants, and they're reading this with different eyes. Now, the biosensors dirt is very interesting because it talks about little micro implants that can be injected in people, okay, so that they might be monitored or so that they may possibly someday in the future be connected to some kind of technology. This is my favorite passage in this dirt, where the author basically says that these bio implants, these injectable microchips, um, these monitoring sensors, okay, uh, for now, as of the time he was writing, which was 2010, do not have long-term usage. Very interesting. So as of 2010, human beings have not been able to create some of these implantable microchips that can be in the body long term. And he explains why. But who wrote these? Well, we know who wrote these because if you look at Dr. Jim Lukatsky and Colm Keller's book, okay, these are, again, the director of OSAP and the operations manager of OSAP. The author was Dr. Bruce Tao of Arizona State University. Okay, Dr. Bruce Tao of Arizona State University wrote the DIRDs on biomaterials and biosensors. Now, that's important. Put a pin in it because we got to go back in time to the 90s when Dr. Roger Leir, a podiatrist in Los Angeles, was taking out these implants from the bodies of people who claim to have been abducted. Okay. And here's a picture of it. These aren't the ones that I'm going to talk about, but they're samples, right? You can find this on the Coast to Coast website. But basically, Bob Bigelow, the billionaire, investor, he was super interested in UFOs, so he started the National Institute of Discovery Science. So he hired the best ufologists, the best scientists he could find to get to the bottom of the UFO situation. So it should also be noted that some of the people in NIDS, like Jacques Vallée, Colin Kelleher, Eric Davis, Hal Puthoff, went on to work for OSAP, right? But basically, Roger Leir went to NIDS and gave some of the implants he had taken out to NIDS, and then those were taken to Los Alamos National Laboratory. But you should read the book in order to see the results. But so Roger Leir gives these implants to Bob Bigelow in 1996. Okay, 8 years later, NIDS disbands. Right, so NIDS shuts down 8 years later. Okay, but 5 years after that, we have OSAP. Right, so OSAP was the Pentagon, Defense Intelligence Agency UFO program. Right, it was a contract that was awarded to Bigelow Aerospace. Okay, and so what did Bob Bigelow do? He rehired some of the people from NIDS, like I mentioned. Hal Puthoff, Colin Kelleher, Eric Davis, Jean Vallée. But now, of course, Jim Lukatsky is running the show. And so OSAP, you see this clear connection between OSAP and NIDS and the implants, okay? And Bruce Tao wrote these DIRDs back in 2010, okay? And 1 year later, he files for an implant patent, as is his right as an American. There's nothing wrong with inventing things and making money. Okay. So, what do these patents look like? Well, here's one of them. Okay. And this is the design of the gizmo, right? This implantable sensor. You can read about it here. And it's interesting that this thing looks somewhat like, if you read the description, the kind of stuff Lou Elizondo handled. Okay? You can pause and read here, and you can pause and read here. And again, it's also interesting that it kind of looks like what is described by Roger Leir and in these photos of alleged implants. So, why do I bring this up? Well, one, here's a clear example of what reverse engineering might look like. Okay. I'm not claiming Bruce Tao took his ideas from, the implants that the government has, but I am holding it out as a possibility that that's exactly what happened. Okay. It may not be a matter of replicating a technology, but rather gaining ideas from it. Okay. Or he's just a genius and he came up with this on his own. And it's just a coincidence that while he was writing, these reference documents for the DIA's UFO program, that he just happened to create, injectable microchip that looks a lot like what Lou Elizondo describes as having been taken out of, pilots' bodies. Okay. But why do I bring this up? And it's the second part of the why, no mention of implants, right? Near the end of Age of Disclosure, they kind of end on an ominous note, right? Lou Elizondo says stuff like, people are going to say when this comes out, I wish I had known sooner. Jay Stratton says the public might not be ready for all of the information, so some of it should be held back, though not as much as what's being held back now. But here's why. Think about it. They used to think that the difference between a human being and a bonobo, or a human being and a chimp, in terms of DNA was like, 1% or 2%. But now we know it's actually a little bit bigger. The genetic distance between human beings and our closest relatives, like bonobos and chimps, is more like 12.5%. And this is, a very recent paper that came out this year. You can go Google it, read about it. But yeah, basically, human beings and chimps are like 88% identical in terms of their DNA. And yet, that similarity is not cause for us to treat chimpanzees like humans, right? They don't have human rights, they don't have citizenship, and we can put them in cages, and we can put implants in them, right, to track them in the wild. Okay, so whoever the others are, they're treating us like chimpanzees. Okay, here's my little AI art of my Atlantean man, the Nordic UFO knot and the small gray. Okay, if the small gray is as genetically distant from us as a chimpanzee, and let's assume that they're all natural, they're not GMOs, right? That the small gray is not a genetically modified organism that does the bidding of the Nord, right? If that's true, then it is treating us like a chimpanzee. Okay. But if the small gray is a genetically modified organism, and if the small gray is the minion of the Nordic, right? Well, the Nordic, I can guarantee you, has DNA that's almost identical to ours. How do I know that? Just use your eyeballs, right? All these people who claim to have seen Nordics say they look like Nordic people from Northern Europe, right? And if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it's a duck, right? So if these Nordics are running the show, then they are behaving like Nazis. So take your pick. Either the Nordics are running the show and they're behaving like Nazis, or the Greys are running the show and they're treating us like chimpanzees. Okay. And the reason I say this is because in Age of Disclosure, Eric Davis mentions two known races, right? Well, here are your two known races. This is from the Free Study, right? The largest study done on UFO contactees, okay, with the largest data pool of UFO contactees. And they asked them all these questions and crunched all the numbers at the end. The most common UFO being encountered in a craft, right? So people who claim to have gone inside the craft, the most common is human looking and small gray. Okay? Human looking and small gray. So those are your two races, right? So again, it all depends on your UFO theory, right? I think it's safe to say that both of these are in the genus Homo, just using an eyeball test, right? Based on, art made on, eyewitness testimony. Okay. So the Greys are either running the show and they're treating us like chimps, or the Nords are running the show and they are behaving like Nazis. Okay. And that's why there's no mention of implants in the Age of Disclosure, even though there's a mention of implants in Luis Elizondo's book. Okay. Because for the normies, this might be too much. Okay. For the legacy program, they already know what's happening. Okay. So it's redundant. But there's another way to look at all this. Okay. And I call it the ice cream and bunny rabbits interpretation of UFOs. Okay. And what do I mean by this? A lot of people don't like this kind of scary possibility. So they prefer what I call the ice cream and bunny rabbits interpretation. And it is this: that at the end of the day, Schopenhauer was right, the Vedantists were right, and there is only one, the one mind. And we are all its dissociated alters living in this kind of dream of a sleeping Vishnu, right? And that really the whole abduction phenomenon and the implants, it's like a koan. It's like this, uh, you know, acted out parable that is intended to get us to think about how we are behaving and treating the other sentient life on the planet, right? So the idea is that, okay, they abduct us, they treat us like chimpanzees, they put implants in us so that we can say, hey, they're treating us like animals. wait a minute, how do we treat animals the way we don't like? Hey, maybe we should stop doing that. Maybe we should start treating animals like people. Maybe we should stop eating meat, right? And maybe if we treat animals like people, the aliens will treat people like aliens, right? That's what I call the ice cream and bunny rabbit's interpretation of ufology. And that would explain why so many UFO contactees report receiving a message of love or of oneness, right? Now, I personally don't believe in this theory because I think it's a little dangerous. If you teach everyone that we are all one, then what you're saying is we're not really individuals and we don't really have free will and that we can never truly be creative, right? And what you're doing is possibly inculcating some kind of apathy, okay, that will be harmful in the event of a full scale, uh, disruptive disclosure, right? Whether these beings, land on the White House lawn or pull up in limousines, as Giorgiani is apt to say, this kind of like we are all one philosophy, it could be used against us, right? By it might be used to demoralize us into accepting some new hierarchy and a lack of, autonomy, individuality, and free will, and by extension, a desire for freedom. Okay, but you can't rule this out. You can't rule out the ice cream and bunny rabbits interpretation. Okay, but you can't rule out the they're treating us like chimps idea or they're behaving like Nazis idea. Okay, depending on who you think is actually running the show, the Greys or the Nords. Okay, and so that's why, again, in Age of Disclosure, there was no mention of implants, and the two races were not specified, right? And so that concludes today's episode. Um, you know, this is heavy stuff, you know, but it's stuff we're gonna have to deal with eventually. And it's stuff that we're not dealing with now because of this slow drip disclosure. But hey, we're closer to it now than we have been in the past. So again, watch Age of Disclosure. It's a great documentary. Support these people. Um, but also understand that this documentary is intended for two audiences: the normies who don't know anything about UFOs and the legacy program. Okay. Get the normies educated on the basics and argue for faster disclosure than what's happening now. Okay. In the meantime, I just want to remind you, like I always do, that your consciousness is not classified. Learn to meditate, become a psychonaut, do whatever it takes to experiment with your subjective awareness, just as long as you don't hurt yourself, anybody else, or break the law. And with that, I bid you